And we are still very much in the wake. And this weekend has been, it seems to me, this past weekend, getting a further understanding of what took place on Wednesday. It was not just the shock. It was, there was not a lot of coverage of this event in the way that you would imagine in terms of like being in the building. It turns out ITVS had a lot or seemed to have the most footage. It's a British outfit. I don't know. Maybe they're just more used to the concept of covering when parliamentary buildings are being stormed.
Well, they would know because the British were the last to storm our Capitol building in the War of 1812.
I have imagined most of these people were probably not alive for that, but yes.
You don't know that.
I don't know that for sure. I cannot confirm that at this time. But what has happened over the past couple of days was a growing awareness of how many organizations funded this and why things went wrong in terms of it, and this is still being sorted out. Many of the sort of like more prominent figures who were in the Capitol have been apprehended by law enforcement. The ones with the zip ties, the cuffs, and obviously
they were there to take hostages, folks.
That's the only reason why you would do that. The bombs, the potential weapons, and more information about how people died. Capitol police officer was essentially beat up and trampled. There was another woman who died who was trampled. Another of the protesters
officer died by suicide over the weekend too, who was involved.
Unclear how directly
that connected, but the police union is claiming a connection.
We had somebody die trying to scale the wall of the Capitol. Many people successfully scaled it. So we're catching up with that. Here is here's Ben Collins from NBC News, showing a right-wing reporter explaining what it was that the Q believers, right? I mean, because I don't know how many of these people were Q or just Trump supporters or what. I don't know if there's even a delineation at this point, but or just right wing, general right wing extremists, white supremacists. Play this clip.
I think an important thing to understand here is that there were two different kinds of people at this rally. There were Proud Boys, militiamen, oath keepers who stormed to the front with the idea that they would, wreak havoc, cause violence, maybe arrest, maybe kill some lawmakers. That was the point for those people. Other people, if you're in the QAnon world, in that universe, you thought you were going into the Capitol and you were storming it for Donald Trump. You thought you were receiving orders from him once you got inside the Capitol. And that's what was happening with a lot of those QAnon people. They were in there waiting for more orders. The guy with the zip ties, there were posts for weeks beforehand in the QAnon world about arresting these lawmakers and then bringing them to justice on behalf of Donald Trump. And they explicitly talked about zip ties. They were makeshift handcuffs for the lawmakers if they got to the right part of the Capitol. I don't think people understand how close we were here. This was close to a mass casualty event involving members of Congress. And it's incredibly dangerous. That's what people are talking about. In QAnon, there's this thing called the Great Awakening. And in the Great Awakening, all of the lawmakers are arrested, rounded up, and executed in a public forum. And that's what this was to a lot of these people. They thought that this was about to happen.
That's really disturbing to hear.
Incredibly disturbing. And the other, when you hear that about the idea that these Q people were looking for, that the idea was like, get to meeting point A, and then we're going to give you further instructions. And of course, Collins is describing a second sort of tranche of white supremacists, white nationalist types who were ready to just wreak havoc, maybe, sort of under the cover of what the Q people doing. I mean, it's hard to know how delineated even they perceive themselves. But when you see this tweet from Boebert, yes, she is a freshman congresswoman, Lauren Boebert. I can't remember quite where she's from. I think she's from Colorado, if I remember correctly.
I believe so, yes.
And she put out a video. I don't know if you remember this from like a week or two ago, like an ad for herself, bragging about how she was bringing her Glock around Washington, D.C., because she's packing heat and that's her right. And she's afraid of what's going on, which, you know, deserves some reinterpretation after all this. Put up this. She is live tweeting when she's inside. We're locked in the House chambers. Okay. And then she says the speaker's been removed from the chambers.
Why would she want to publicly say where Nancy Pelosi's whereabouts are, huh?
I mean, I
That's a legitimate question.
It's a legitimate
and
question.
A terrifying one.
And it's all like, you know, like, I can't tell if she was sending out like, we're locked in the chambers and we're safe, so nobody worry about us. Or if it's saying like, this is where we are, come get us.
Within the context of who she is, it's not a crazy thought, the one that we are having. I mean, I think it's one of the more logical ones.
I mean,
especially when you see how close it got. I mean, the Igor Bobich of, I'm sorry if I butchered his name, of Huffington Post tweeted out a timeline of how close it was in the Senate. I mean, they were within minutes, 2 or 3 minutes after the evacuation of these lawmakers, and they had zip ties. And again, Nancy Pelosi's one thing, but we're always talking about the ire and the vitriol and the racism that's thrown at people like Ilhan Omar and Ocasio-Cortez. Can you imagine if they got their hands on them? It was incredibly close. And the worst part is that the id of this, the fury, is fueled by the colleagues of the very people that these insurrectionists were trying to kidnap and potentially murder.
Yep. So, I mean, this is, you know, that's the thing, is that like there's a lot of debate about, you know, how serious was this insofar as like, you know, is it possible to overstate how dangerous? And I think like we just don't know. And the fact that, to the extent that we know at this point, there was no, you know, military involvement, although, you know, I guess that's true in the strictest sense. We don't know. Like we really don't have a full sense of what was coordinated by whom and what. I'm not suggesting that there was any major military participation, but I'm saying like, you know, we have a lot of vets there. We don't know like why, if it is the case that the Sergeant of Arms, both the House and the Senate, were worried about optics. The National Guard may have been worried about moving in. We don't know why they would be worried about that, as opposed to, let's say, the BLM protests, or why they would be worried about. I mean,
they were not concerned about optics there.
Or maybe they were. It's just that there were optics that they appreciated more.
It was the inverse. Yeah.
The point is, this needs to be investigated. It needs to be investigated thoroughly. It needs to be investigated publicly. We need to have a better sense of who was involved in this. And I want to know why there was a congresswoman who was basically telling her Twitter followers where Nancy Pelosi was and where she was not at any given point as there's an assault on the Capitol building. It just seems really scary. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be talking to David Dayen about all of what we're hearing in terms of the politics about holding Republicans to account. And then also the flip side of this, what we know from where the Biden administration is in the wake of Georgia and these appointments. And big announcement from Joe Biden last week, very important one, that he intends not to be beholden to the rhetoric of austerity or the policies of austerity at this time. Now is the time to go big. And we'll talk to David Dayen to get a sense of just how big Joe Biden's going to go. Be right back in a moment.